Most of us want to achieve some level of cinematic literacy. We want to understand the films that shaped the last century and see where the medium's modern conventions actually came from. This chart shows the scale of the challenge. When you compile the major critical consensus roundups, like the AFI or Sight and Sound lists, the sheer volume is staggering. These overlapping lists require a commitment of roughly 250 hours of viewing time. If you try to tackle that list strictly in chronological order, you'll likely hit a wall. Notice the sharp drop-off in the 1920s and 30s. This is the era where most people lose interest and abandon the project. You hit the silent era, the pacing feels slow, the cultural distance is high, and the whole plan collapses into a mess of unfinished movies. The goal is to strategically sample these films to gain the maximum cultural context for the time you invest, rather than trying to consume every masterpiece in order. We can simplify the process by using a specific framework: viewing cost versus cultural ROI. Viewing cost is the friction you feel as a modern viewer. It's the effort required to adjust to silent era pacing, a lack of modern sound design, or acting styles that look exaggerated by today's standards. Cultural ROI is your return. On this quadrant chart, the x-axis measures that friction, and the y-axis tracks the film's impact on modern storytelling, the specific cinematic vocabulary you gain by watching it. Different decades are scattered across this matrix. A movie from 1925 demands an entirely different level of active viewing than a movie from 1975. To build genuine cinematic literacy, you need to recognize that different decades function as distinct languages rather than competing entertainment options. In the 1920s and 30s, filmmakers developed the core techniques of visual world-building. Because they lacked spoken dialogue, they were forced to communicate entirely through composition. You see this in Expressionism. Directors used stark shadows and distorted sets to convey psychological states that characters couldn't explain out loud. Simultaneously, physical performers were perfecting the mechanics of spatial framing. They learned how to communicate complete emotional arcs through precise movement and facial cues alone. The viewing cost here is high. You have to read intertitles, adjust to theatrical acting, and engage with a world that has no modern sound design. The return on this era is a masterclass in visual storytelling. The dangerous, real-world stunts of Buster Keaton and the architectural nightmares of Fritz Lang established the mechanics of modern action and science fiction long before the first digital pixel was ever rendered. By the 1940s and 50s, movie-making was industrialized. This was the era of studio control, where every element was carefully manufactured on massive sound stages. The friction in this era involves navigating stage-bound melodrama and the strict moral restrictions of the Hays Code, dictating what could be shown on screen. Working within tight constraints led to rapid progress. Influential directors of this era manipulated these technical constraints to establish the standards of modern cinematic suspense and pacing. This era provides an education in airtight scriptwriting and character chemistry. The narrative rules established here still provide the structural framework for most modern Hollywood movies. In the 1960s and 70s, filmmakers dismantled polished studio rules. They moved out of sound stages and took cameras into the streets to capture an unvarnished reality. The viewing friction here is tonal. You have to endure cynical attitudes, moral ambiguity, and bleak endings that offer no traditional sense of relief. Directors used structuralist pacing, forcing the audience to experience the mundane, real-time endurance of their subjects through long, uninterrupted takes. This era utilized an obsessive focus on character interiority, birthing the flawed, modern antihero that now dominates prestige television and film. The return here is immense cultural relevance and a pacing that feels familiar to modern ears, but the trade-off is an emotionally challenging experience. The 21st century is defined by hyper-fragmented narratives, digital aesthetics, and a breakdown of traditional borders. International cinema and animation are now core components of the modern critical curriculum, reflecting a more global perspective on the medium. These films offer high returns for minimal effort. They provide immediate reflections on modern technology, existential isolation, and the complexities of globalism. The viewing cost involves navigating a lack of historical consensus. It's often difficult to separate lasting impact from the excitement of a recent release. While modern films offer the lowest friction for contemporary viewers, Relying on them exclusively leaves you without the historical context needed to see how cinema evolved. Starting your cinematic education in an era that clashes with your personal tastes is the fastest way to burn out on classic films. You can use this diagnostic map to match your current preferences with the optimal starting decade. If you prefer dialogue-driven stories and clear character archetypes, follow the path to the 1940s and 50s. If you want gritty character studies, jump to the 1970s. If you are fascinated by the mechanics of visual composition, start with the 1920s. Matching your current attention span to the right era's friction level provides the momentum needed to explore the rest of film history. If your viewing time is limited, skip the silent era entirely for now. Begin in the 1970s. The pacing and gritty tone will feel recognizable. As you get used to older aesthetics, you can work backward toward the 1940s. For those who want to understand the mechanics of the medium as quickly as possible, build a chronological 5-film playlist. By watching one standout film from each era, you can see the transition from 1920s expressionism to 2010s digital fragmentation. This provides a clear view of the medium's evolution in just a few sittings. Cinematic literacy comes from recognizing how each generation of artists broke the existing rules of the screen to rewrite the language of film.